Invisible training. How ISI shapes silent warriors. The hidden philosophy of training. Imagine a world where warriors are not born on battlefields, but inside silent rooms where strength is measured not by noise, but by control, and where victory is defined long before any enemy ever appears. This is the world of invisible training, where Pakistan's intelligence discipline was quietly shaped through philosophy, patience, and psychological endurance. Before any agent learns how to move, fight, or observe, they are taught how to think, how to wait, and how to remain unseen. This is not a story of weapons or violence, but a story of minds forged in darkness, where preparation becomes a silent ritual and discipline becomes a way of life. Hello everyone, how are you doing today? Where are you watching from? Make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with anyone who loves deep documentary-style stories, because what you are about to see is not just a story, it is a journey into the philosophy of silence itself. Now, let us begin. When Pakistan emerged as a new nation, it did not inherit stability. It inherited uncertainty. There were no maps for security, no blueprints for protection, and no manuals for survival. In those early uncertain years, the idea behind intelligence was not about power, it was about survival. Within this environment, the foundational philosophy of what would later become ISI-style training began to take shape, not as a formal rulebook, but as a mindset. The belief was simple yet powerful. The strongest guardian is the one no one can see coming. This belief slowly turned into an invisible doctrine, taught quietly between trusted minds, long before any training center had a name or an address. This hidden philosophy focused on three core ideas: silence, patience, and anticipation. Silence was not just the absence of speech, it was the presence of control. An individual who could control their reactions, their emotions, and their impulses could control outcomes without force. Patience was seen as the highest form of strength. Trainees were taught that time was a weapon, and the one who could wait longer, observe deeper, and react later often won without conflict. Anticipation, the third pillar, meant learning to sense danger before it became visible, to read patterns before they turned into events, and to understand intentions before they became actions. Inside these early training ideologies, there were no loud commands or dramatic drills. Instead, there were quiet rooms, long hours of observation, and exercises designed to sharpen the human mind. Young recruits were encouraged to sit in silence and listen to small details, subtle movements, and barely audible changes in their surroundings. Shadows on walls, reflections in glass, footstep rhythms, and body language became their textbooks. This mental discipline was considered more powerful than physical methods, because it built an internal strength that could not be taken away. As time moved forward, the philosophy became more structured. What started as instinct slowly developed into doctrine. Trainers believed that an agent must first defeat chaos within themselves before facing chaos in the world. They created silent routines where trainees had to write thoughts they were not allowed to speak, observe people without interaction, and reconstruct entire scenes from memory using only small visual clues. Mistakes were not corrected through punishment, but through isolation and repetition, forcing the mind to adapt, sharpen, and grow resilient. This philosophy also shaped how loyalty was understood. Loyalty was not about slogans or public identity. It was about quiet commitment. A true operative was someone who could walk through ordinary life without carrying visible pride, without seeking recognition, and without ever revealing their role. This mindset created a new kind of psychological soldier, one who fought battles in the mind long before any physical confrontation ever became necessary. The hidden philosophy of training was never written in books, never announced in ceremonies, and never explained in public speeches. It was passed quietly from mentor to trainee, from disciplined mind to curious soul. And through this quiet transmission, a system was born that valued invisibility over attention, foresight over reaction, and control over chaos. This was the silent beginning of a method that would shape generations of intelligence professionals, building guardians who protected without being seen, planned without being heard, and prepared in ways the outside world could never fully understand. In this world of invisible training, the first lesson was never about strength. It was about stillness, because only those who master stillness can move through the shadows with purpose, discipline, and silent power. How ISI shapes silent warriors. Inside the fictional training grounds, here where we left off, the world of stillness gave birth to a physical space that could never be seen on maps. A place that existed without a name and functioned without recognition. After the philosophy was shaped, the next step was to give that philosophy a home, a protected environment where silence could be trained, corrected, and perfected. This is where the idea of hidden training grounds was born, not as a military base, not as a visible institute, but as an invisible ecosystem designed to isolate the mind from noise and distraction and rebuild it with discipline and control. These training grounds were not marked by flags or signs. They looked like ordinary places to an untrained eye. Simple buildings, quiet corridors, controlled lighting, and monitored silence created an atmosphere where every sound mattered. The purpose of this environment was not intimidation. It was refinement. Trainees did not feel like soldiers. They felt like observers being slowly reshaped into instruments of perception. The walls did not just hold them in. They absorbed their fears, their doubts, and their impulsive thoughts. The structure of these centers was built around secrecy and compartmentalization. No one knew the full layout. No one understood the entire system. Each room served a single psychological purpose. One room tested silence. Another tested memory. Another tested stress tolerance. Trainees would move through these rooms without being told what they were learning. The absence of instructions was itself the lesson. They were learning to function without guidance, to adapt without reassurance, and to survive mentally without dependence. Schedules were deliberately unpredictable. Lights turned on and off at random intervals. Sounds were sometimes artificial and sometimes real, forcing the brain to constantly question what was genuine and what was manipulation. This was not about cruelty. This was about creating minds that could never be caught off guard. A mind trained in uncertainty becomes calm in real chaos. That was the science behind this invisible system. Communication inside these grounds was based on reduction rather than expansion. The fewer words spoken, the sharper the understanding became. Eye contact, pauses in movement, and breathing patterns became forms of language. Trainees learned that a single glance could mean more than a paragraph of speech, and that silence could carry deeper meaning than any order. In this environment, language was stripped down to its purest psychological form. What made these grounds unique was how they treated failure. Failure was not seen as weakness. It was seen as raw material. When someone failed, they were not shouted at or publicly judged. They were isolated into silent reflection until they returned sharper, calmer, and mentally stronger. This method slowly removed ego and replaced it with awareness. Over time, fear disappeared. In its place came quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need validation. This fictionalized environment, often called Section Black in research-based documentaries, represents how such training concepts are understood in theory. It is not about revealing real locations or sensitive details. It is about understanding the psychology of how invisible institutions shape invisible minds. The true power of these grounds was not physical. It was cognitive. The ability to control thought, manage emotion, and recalibrate perception was the real structure hidden inside these walls. The world outside never heard the footsteps inside these corridors. It never saw the quiet transformations taking place. But within these silent grounds, ordinary individuals slowly began the process of becoming something entirely different. They were not yet agents. They were not yet shadows. They were minds under construction, moving quietly toward a future that would demand silence, precision, and unwavering control. How ISI shapes silent warriors, breaking the mind, building the focus. The silence that shaped the walls of the hidden training grounds soon turned inward, where the real battlefield was not outside, but inside the human mind. After the philosophy was carved and the environment was prepared, the next stage began with the most difficult task imaginable: breaking old mental habits and rebuilding focus from the ground up. This was not about pain or fear. It was about dismantling distraction, ego, and emotional noise that could weaken an operator in real-world conditions. Inside this stage, trainees were exposed to long periods of controlled monotony. Hours of staring at static patterns, silent charts, and undefined movements trained the brain to extract meaning from the smallest possible changes. A flicker of light, a shifting shadow, or a slight variation in sound became signals that the brain learned to recognize instantly. The purpose was simple. When real danger arrives, there is no time for overthinking. The mind must be trained to see what others miss without hesitation. Memory became the central weapon at this stage. Trainees were given complex patterns, faces, movements, and abstract sequences, which they had to reconstruct perfectly without notes or recordings. This shaped a level of mental discipline that forced the brain to create structured internal filing systems. Every detail had a place. Every observation had a category. Over time, this transformed an ordinary memory into an operational memory, capable of holding pressure without distortion. Focus training went beyond attention span. It explored the idea of selective awareness. Trainees were taught that not everything deserves attention. The true skill was knowing what to ignore. Noise, movement, emotional traps, and misleading cues were designed to distract them. Those who failed chased illusions. Those who succeeded learned to remain centered, grounded, and observant only where it mattered most. The psychological reshaping was slow, silent, and deeply scientific. Experts studied breathing rhythms, eye movement, attention cycles, and emotional fluctuations. This was always done in a documentary-safe manner without exposing real techniques, but the theory behind it was powerful. A stable mind in an unstable world has a strategic advantage. That belief fueled the progression of this phase. There were moments of mental collapse, but they were treated as milestones rather than endings. When a trainee experienced mental exhaustion, they were guided not through force, but through structure. Silence again became the teacher. A quiet room, a slow breath, a steady heartbeat. This is where weakness turned into clarity and fear slowly transformed into control. Over time, the mind stopped fighting the process and started cooperating with it. The chaos inside slowly disappeared, replaced by a calm operational rhythm. Thoughts became deliberate. Reactions became measured. Observation became instinct rather than effort. This was the moment when trainees stopped feeling like ordinary people and started becoming something more refined, more disciplined, and more quietly powerful. By the end of this stage, nothing dramatic had changed on the surface. There were no medals, no celebrations, and no announcements. But inside, a foundation had been laid. A foundation of focus, memory, control, and psychological stability that would define everything that came next. The breaking of the mind was never the destruction of the person. It was the construction of something sharper, calmer, and infinitely more aware. The body under pressure. In the shadowed halls of Pakistan's most secretive intelligence training facilities, physical endurance was not merely a measure of strength, it was a crucible designed to test the limits of mind and body simultaneously. Here, every trainee faced exercises crafted to push them beyond conventional boundaries, to prepare operatives who could function under extreme stress, fatigue, and unpredictability. The first stage of physical training emphasized controlled exertion. Trainees were required to complete long-distance runs across varied terrain, sometimes carrying weighted packs or equipment to simulate operational loads. Every step, every movement was observed, not just for speed or stamina, but for precision, poise, and decision-making under pressure. Physical drills were integrated with cognitive challenges. Agents had to memorize codes, analyze mock intelligence reports, or respond to simulated crises mid-exercise. The goal was to train minds and bodies to operate in perfect synergy, where exhaustion never diminished mental clarity. Stress management formed the next core element. Instructors deliberately introduced unpredictable variables, sudden obstacles, simulated ambushes, unexpected environmental changes like artificial weather effects or altered schedules. Trainees were taught to maintain composure, regulate their heartbeat and breathing, and focus on objectives without distraction. The philosophy was simple yet profound. Calm under pressure was a weapon as powerful as any tool. Through repetition, controlled exposure, and graded challenges, the trainees learned to internalize tranquility, making poise their default response to uncertainty. Habit formation under pressure was meticulously reinforced. Every day involved repeated exercises to ingrain reflexive calmness. Trainees learned techniques to dissociate stress from decision-making, including controlled breathing patterns, micro-pauses for observation, and mental rehearsal of tactical maneuvers. These routines were designed to create automatic responses, ensuring that in the heat of real operations, instincts guided precise and measured actions. Nutrition, recovery, and sleep were also carefully regulated. Physical strain was paired with rest cycles that trained agents to recover quickly while maintaining operational readiness. Sleep deprivation simulations tested endurance further, teaching trainees to perform cognitive and physical tasks even when severely fatigued. Every detail was designed to mirror real operational stressors, creating resilience that extended beyond mere physical strength. The curriculum extended to defensive and offensive tactics. Hand-to-hand combat, tactical movement, evasion, and silent approach techniques were practiced in controlled environments, replicating urban, rural, and hostile settings. Emphasis was placed on efficiency and adaptability. No single method was rigidly applied. Trainees were expected to adapt, improvise, and make instant decisions based on environmental cues. Every drill reinforced the connection between body control, situational awareness, and rapid, precise action. Observation remained central even in physical training. Each trainee was assessed for subtle behavioral cues under stress. Micro-expressions, posture adjustments, and reaction times provided insight into their psychological state. Trainers used this data to customize guidance, pushing individuals to improve weaknesses while reinforcing strengths. This blend of physical, mental, and observational training created operatives who were agile, composed, and perceptive in equal measure. By the end of Part 4, trainees had undergone a transformation. They were no longer ordinary individuals, but operatives with bodies conditioned for endurance, reflexes sharpened for tactical efficiency, and minds trained to remain calm under extreme pressure. The foundation laid here would carry forward into the next stages of their development, preparing them for silent coordination, intelligence gathering, and the untraceable operations that defined the shadowed world of Pakistan's intelligence services. The Code of Silence. In the unseen corridors of Pakistan's intelligence training centers, silence was not simply a discipline, it was an operational philosophy. Every trainee entering these facilities learned quickly that in the shadowed world of covert operations, spoken words were liabilities, and discretion was the most potent tool. The Code of Silence, a principle woven into every aspect of training, governed communication, coordination, and even thought. Trainees were first introduced to silent coordination techniques. Visual signals, subtle hand gestures, eye contact patterns, and body positioning became the language of operatives. These methods were designed to function under conditions where verbal communication could expose operations to hostile forces or compromise an agent as safety. Instructors emphasized precision. Each gesture had to be unambiguous, universally understood within the team, and executed without hesitation. This practice created a mental reflex, training operatives to think and act without uttering a word, even in high-stress scenarios. The psychology behind silence was reinforced daily. Exercises simulated scenarios of extreme tension, ambushes, hostage situations, and intelligence collection missions were staged, with communication restricted entirely to nonverbal methods. Trainees had to relay complex instructions, coordinate team maneuvers, and respond to evolving threats without a single word. Through repeated exposure, the mind internalized the value of restraint and observation. By minimizing expression, operatives learned to maximize control over every interaction. A critical part of this training included understanding human behavior under pressure. Trainees observed instructors, peers, and role players to detect micro-expressions, unintended movements, or subtle vocal cues. Every detail, no matter how small, carried meaning. The art of silent observation cultivated intuition, allowing operatives to anticipate actions before they occurred and respond decisively. Psychological resilience was constantly tested. Trainees faced mock betrayals, misinformation, and conflicting instructions to see how effectively they could maintain focus without verbal communication. Within these silent drills, hypothetical case studies were introduced. A fictitious trainee named Reza became a central figure in exercises. His journey through the program illustrated the transformation from a novice with ordinary habits to an operative capable of decoding intentions, coordinating teams, and making critical decisions entirely without speech. Reza's progression highlighted both the mental and emotional adaptation required. The ability to suppress instinctive reactions while maintaining analytical clarity was the essence of the code of silence. Training also emphasized ethical boundaries within silence. Operatives were instructed that discretion did not mean dishonesty, but that secrecy must serve the mission and protect lives. Trainees learned to balance empathy with operational necessity, making decisions that adhered to moral standards while remaining tactically effective. Silent collaboration became not just a method but a mindset, a constant awareness that every action, every observation, and every inaction could carry profound consequences. The final stage of Part 5 integrated field simulations with silent coordination. Teams moved through urban mock-ups, forest and border analogous terrains, executing missions under observation. Debriefings analyzed micro-decisions: who initiated a signal, who reacted, and how well the team maintained cohesion without verbal prompts. Success was measured not by volume of action, but by precision, discretion, and effectiveness under absolute silence. By the conclusion of this phase, trainees had internalized the essence of silent operation. They had become operatives who could interpret intent, coordinate with colleagues, and respond to threats entirely through observation and subtle signals. The mind learned to prioritize, listening, watching, and anticipating over speaking, turning silence into a strategic advantage that would define their careers in intelligence work. Screening and psychological profiling. Within the shadowed walls of Pakistan's intelligence training facilities, the focus shifted from mastering silence and coordination to understanding the human mind itself. The process of screening and psychological profiling was a critical phase in transforming recruits into operatives capable of navigating complex, high-stakes situations. Every individual entering the program was not only evaluated for skills and endurance, but also for mental resilience, adaptability, and ethical judgment. The first step involved intensive psychological assessment. Trainees underwent a series of evaluations designed to map their personality traits, stress responses, and cognitive tendencies. Questionnaire, situational simulations, and behavioral observation were combined to create a comprehensive profile. This allowed instructors to identify strengths that could be leveraged in field operations and weaknesses that required targeted development. Unlike conventional testing, these assessments were dynamic, with real-time monitoring of reactions during simulated crisis. One of the most important concepts introduced was the idea of behavioral predictability. Operatives needed to anticipate both allies' and adversaries' actions. By understanding human psychology, trainees could read micro-expressions, body language, and subtle verbal cues. These skills were honed through exercises where instructors enacted unexpected threats or ethical dilemmas, requiring instant analysis and judgment. The ability to remain calm, observant, and decisive under these conditions was a hallmark of a successful operative. Screening also emphasized ethical reasoning. Agents in training were exposed to morally ambiguous scenarios, testing their ability to balance operational objectives with ethical standards. This was vital, as intelligence operations often involved choices where every action had potential consequences for human lives. Trainees learned to navigate these situations, making rapid decisions without compromising the mission or their moral framework. Another component of psychological preparation was stress inoculation. Recruits experienced controlled exposure to pressure, uncertainty, and simulated danger, gradually increasing their tolerance. These sessions involved physical exertion combined with mental challenges, such as solving complex problems while under observation or making tactical decisions in environments designed to disorient them. Over time, this built not only confidence, but also the ability to maintain clarity of thought when facing real operational threats. A fictitious candidate, Amir, was often referenced during training exercises to illustrate the profiling process. Amir began as an ordinary recruit with notable curiosity and adaptability, but limited impulse control. Through rigorous screening and continuous feedback, he learned to channel instincts into calculated actions, demonstrating how psychological assessment guided personal growth. His journey underscored the program's dual focus on technical skill and cognitive sophistication. Team dynamics were another area of focus. Profiling was not limited to individuals. It extended to evaluating how trainees interacted within small units. Silent coordination, trust, and the ability to anticipate team members' actions were all monitored. Psychological profiling ensured that operatives not only excelled individually, but could also function seamlessly as part of a covert cell, where collaboration without explicit communication was essential. Instructors reinforced the importance of mental adaptability. Trainees practiced switching roles, adjusting to new environments, and solving unpredictable problems. Exercises often included simulations of hostage negotiations, infiltration scenarios, or surveillance operations, emphasizing how psychological acumen directly impacted operational success. Every response, hesitation, and decision was analyzed to improve both individual and collective capability. By the conclusion of Part 6, the foundation of an operative's psychological toolkit was firmly established. Trainees were equipped with the ability to read situations and people accurately, anticipate threats, control emotional reactions, and make ethically informed decisions under pressure. This combination of screening and profiling ensured that only the most mentally prepared individuals progressed to field simulations and advanced training, ready to operate as part of Pakistan's unseen intelligence network. Simulated missions and silent operations, inside controlled environments designed to mirror the uncertainty of real-world intelligence work. Trainees were introduced to the most critical stage of their preparation: simulated missions. These exercises transformed theoretical knowledge into practical instinct. Every corridor, every shadowed room, and every silent signal was designed to test how far a candidate could go without breaking composure, discipline, or secrecy. The goal was simple but unforgiving: prepare the mind and body to function perfectly when no margin for error exists. The simulated missions were built around realistic but safe training environments. Abandoned-style facilities, mock urban streets, and specially designed indoor structures recreated the psychological tension of field conditions. Trainees were not taught how to conduct real operations. Instead, they were trained to understand observation, patience, and timing in a purely educational and non-operational context. The focus was on developing awareness rather than action. One of the most important drills was observation discipline. In these sessions, recruits were placed in controlled locations and tasked with identifying behavioral patterns, environmental changes, and subtle movements. They learned to measure time through instinct, to distinguish between natural and unnatural sounds, and to record mental maps of their surroundings. This was not about action, but about learning to see what others ignored. Another cornerstone of this phase was failure tolerance training. Trainees were deliberately placed in unwinnable situations. The purpose was not humiliation or fear, but psychological conditioning. Candidates learned that failure was part of mastery. When a mission simulation ended unsuccessfully, the focus shifted to analysis. What emotional response occurred, how quickly clarity was regained, and how the mind recovered under pressure. This built resilience and eliminated the fear of making mistakes in high-stress environments. A fictional trainee named Reza once again appeared as a symbolic example in these training modules. Reza, known for his perfectionist mindset, initially struggled with simulated failure. Each unsuccessful scenario affected his confidence. Through guided psychological coaching, he learned that silence, stillness, and patience were forms of strength. His journey demonstrated how silent operations were not only physical exercises, but deeply emotional transformations. Silent coordination was central to every simulation. Teams trained to move, observe, and respond using nonverbal communication. Hand signals, breathing rhythms, and synchronized timing replaced words. These exercises were not about covert action, but about harmony and trust. Every participant learned to rely completely on their team while maintaining individual awareness. The training environments were repeatedly altered to prevent predictability. Lighting conditions changed, sound levels shifted, environmental pressure increased. This forced trainees to adapt purely through mental flexibility. The art of silent operation, as taught in this phase, was not about danger, but about discipline, about becoming invisible through awareness rather than aggression. By the end of Part 7, trainees were no longer thinking in terms of fear or success. They were thinking in terms of control, awareness, and internal clarity. Simulated missions had taught them that silence was not emptiness, but communication itself. Observation was not passive, but powerful. Failure was not an ending, but a tool to sharpen the mind. They were now ready to step into the final transformation, the moment where training stops feeling like training and identity begins to shift. Becoming the Shadow Guardians, the culmination of years of rigorous mental and physical conditioning came in the final phase, transforming disciplined trainees into the silent protectors of national security, the Shadow Guardians. This stage was where all prior knowledge, observation skills, endurance training, and psychological conditioning converged to create operatives capable of thinking, reacting, and surviving in complete discretion. The philosophy behind this transformation was simple yet profound. Every action taken, every thought considered, and every decision made must serve the mission without leaving a trace of the operative's presence. In this phase, the focus shifted to character formation. Recruits were guided to internalize a mindset where their individual ego became secondary to the mission. Exercises were designed to test moral judgment, ethical flexibility, and operational responsibility. The operatives learned to navigate morally complex scenarios in a controlled environment, understanding that real-life operations often demand split-second decisions with no clear right or wrong. Team silence protocols were introduced to reinforce cohesion. Even within small units, communication became almost entirely nonverbal. Every gesture, glance, and position held meaning, creating a silent language of trust and coordination. Operatives practiced moving as a single organism, anticipating each other's decisions while maintaining individual initiative. This cultivated not only operational efficiency, but a psychological bond where every member could depend on another implicitly. Psychological profiling reached its advanced stages in this phase. Each operative underwent detailed evaluation to identify emotional strengths, weaknesses, and decision-making patterns. Training adapted to individual profiles, emphasizing personal growth areas and reinforcing innate capabilities. Instructors guided operatives through exercises that tested loyalty, courage, and critical thinking under extreme pressure. Every simulation, every scenario, and every challenge was recorded and analyzed to ensure each Shadow Guardian reached peak operational readiness. The final exercises also introduced comparative intelligence analysis. Operatives studied the methods, philosophies, and historical missions of global intelligence agencies. From the CIA's operational versatility to MI6's subtle diplomacy, Mossad's precision, and other leading organizations, each lesson reinforced the importance of adaptability, foresight, and innovation. However, unlike global counterparts, the focus remained uniquely attuned to local conditions, regional geopolitics, and internal security imperatives. This comparative perspective allowed operatives to understand not just how to act, but why each decision carries strategic weight. Ethical boundaries and internal control were emphasized to ensure that operatives could execute missions effectively without compromising legal or moral standards. Shadow Guardians were trained to manage personal emotions, avoid impulsive actions, and operate within an invisible framework of rules, ensuring that national security remained paramount while protecting the integrity of the organization. Finally, future training trends were introduced to prepare operatives for evolving threats. Scenarios included cyber intelligence exercises, psychological warfare simulations, and advanced observation challenges. By integrating emerging technologies with classical fieldcraft and human intelligence skills, the organization ensured that each operative could adapt seamlessly to an increasingly complex global landscape. At the conclusion of this transformation, trainees were no longer students. They became the living embodiment of the agency's philosophy: silent, observant, disciplined, and entirely devoted to safeguarding the nation. These Shadow Guardians represented the invisible shield that watches borders, monitors threats, and ensures that danger is neutralized long before it becomes visible. The legacy of this training was clear. Precision, discretion, and unwavering commitment defined the operatives, who now stood ready to operate anywhere, at any time, without leaving a trace. As we conclude this deep dive into the shadows of Pakistan's intelligence, remember that every skill, every mission, and every agent you've seen is part of a carefully orchestrated system built for national security. A journey from grueling training to becoming a Shadow Guardian is a testament to discipline, strategy, and unwavering focus. If you found this documentary insightful and engaging, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video with fellow enthusiasts of history, intelligence, and espionage. Your support helps us bring more research-based, cinematic stories directly to you. Disclaimer: this documentary is based on research and publicly available information. Some events and characters are fictionalized for storytelling purposes. The content is intended for educational and documentary-style purposes only. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more stories from the world of intelligence and covert operations.